Hello, so today we are going to work on a basic GIF animation sequence. And to help with this exercise, I have in our class Google Drive folder, there is another folder called Files for Class Practice. And within that Files for Class Practice folder, there is an assignment 1 practice folder. So you'll notice that when you open that, there are a series of pictures that I just took on my cell phone of pencil erasers in various configurations. And so the first thing that you will do is to download all of those images. When you do that, I recommend having a folder that you store that in called raw files. So any files that we use for class practice should go into a raw files folder. Since we will be using Photoshop for this first assignment, you can go to your Applications folder, and within the Applications folder you'll find another folder for Adobe Photoshop, and within that folder you will find just the icon for Photoshop that you can click and drag down to your dock, and it will remain there. You can also do this for any other applications that we use throughout the class. Okay, well, so let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial itself. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag all those images down to Photoshop, my Photoshop icon. And there you can see, and each image has its own tab, its own image tab at the top, as you can see. And all I'm doing is I'm arranging those tabs so that the sequence is in order from eraser 1, eraser 2, and so on, just to make it easier for me. Now you're going to want to make sure and have your layers panel in Photoshop as well as your timeline panel checkmarked. That means that you'll be able to see your layers, there it is right there, and your timeline, which we'll use later in the process. So the first thing we're going to do is to take the eraser 2 image and Command A to select all and Command C to copy that image. Then we're going to go back to the first file and paste the image onto that file. So what I've done, if you look over at your layers panel, you'll now see 2 layers. One says background, which had that cardboard background with no erasers, and the second layer that is now stacked on top of it is the one that I just copied and pasted from the eraser 2 file. So I don't need the eraser 2 file anymore. I can get rid of that, or I can close that out. And then I'm just going to move on to the next file, eraser 3. I'm going to do the same thing. Command A to select all, Command C to copy that, and then I go back to eraser 1 and paste. So now I have 3 layers in the eraser 1 layer panel. So one thing I'm going to do a little differently this time is I'm going to go to my opacity, and that's located in my layers panel, and I'm going to turn the opacity down to around 50% so that I can see that single eraser that was from the eraser 2 file directly under this new image from the eraser 3 file. And the reason why I do this is I'm going to line up, and I'm just going to use that center eraser to kind of line up those 2 images. Once I'm done with that, I can go over to the eraser 4 file, and it's got 5 erasers. The same thing. I'm going to Command A to select all, Command C to copy and go to the eraser 1 file, and Command V as in victory to paste in place. I do the same thing again, and this time it doesn't. I'm just demonstrating this because in this case it doesn't make too much of a difference. So last time I did opacity at 100%. This time I'm going to do fill at around 50%. For what we're doing today, either one of those works fine. Once again, I'm going to line up the center erasers and close out the eraser 4 file. I don't need it. I'll do the same with the eraser 5 file, copying and pasting that one. Then I go turn down the fill or the opacity, and I line up that center eraser. So I'm just trying to center all these images that are stacked. And I go to my final file, eraser 6, and copy and paste that. And I want you to see too how I turn the fill down, just a close-up of that. All right, so now all 6 layers, all 6 of my eraser images are aligned. And now I'm going to just tweak things a little bit more and resize. So Command T will allow me to scale up or scale down. And you can see that I'm clicking and dragging on the corners of the image to scale it up and down, both horizontally and vertically. If I were to click on one of the side or top little boxes of the frame, I would squash or stretch it. So I want to make sure and grab the corners. Also, you can make sure that the lock icon and the image transform options is locked. I've temporarily unlocked it so you can see what happens when that isn't locked. I squash and stretch it. So it's important to make sure that that lock icon is clicked on. So it should be a little darker than the background. Okay, so I do that for the same, the other layers as needed if I need to scale those down or scale them up, and just sort of continue to tweak my alignments so that the erasers, as much as possible, are one on top of the other. Once I've done all of that, I want to make sure and turn my fill and opacity, whichever one of those I used, all the way back up, right? So now all layers should be 100% visible, no transparency at all, no see-through. We're ready to crop the image to make the erasers fit a little bit more snugly, but also to trim some of these edges that you can see there's some irregularities. From the top and the bottom and on the sides, I'm able to bring that framing in a little bit. Whenever I get the image as I want it cropped, I can press the return key and it solidifies the crop. Once I have cropped the image to how I like, I turn off all the visibility icons for all the layers except the background layer. So you can see the visibility icons are portrayed by little eyeballs to the left of the layer thumbnail image in the layers panel. And now I'm ready to start creating the animation. So you'll remember that I had you open your timeline window, which is now situated at the bottom. If you do not see your timeline window, go to the window drop-down menu in Photoshop and make sure that timeline is selected or checkmarked, and then you should see it show up at the bottom. So once I have my timeline up, I can click the button in the center that says create frame animation, and then I get these little thumbnails that look like what you see here. Each frame has a 1, a 2, and then at the bottom there's like it says 0 seconds. And to duplicate each frame, I click the little plus button icon right next to the trash can at the bottom of the timeline. And once I've duplicated a frame, I go to my layers panel and I click the visibility icon for, in this case, layer 1. So it's my next layer up. And then I click the duplicate frame icon at the bottom of the timeline, and then I repeat the process. So I go this time up to where it says layer 2, the 4 erasers, and then I click the duplicate frame icon again, click the visibility icon in the layers panel. So little by little, we are making each of these layers visible. Now, what happened when I got to my 4th frame is that there was a little artifact where I could see part of the layer below where it had sort of snuck out from the current layer. And so I'm having to crop my image again. And I think this will be okay as long as it doesn't crop in so far that it cuts off the erasers at one stage. So there I am. And I might even try cropping it from the bottom later on. All right, so I turn on the visibility icon for layer 4. I add another frame in the timeline, and I turn on the visibility icon for my final layer. Right, and you can see now that I have 6 frames in my timeline, and each frame represents a layer in the layers panel. And it looks like cropping wise, I didn't lose any of the erasers on the top, but I might go in and I might crop a little bit from the bottom now. There we go. And when I play that back by pressing the VTR controls at the bottom of my timeline, you can see it goes very, very fast. So I might want it to go a little bit slower than that. So what I will do is I will go down to my timeline and shift select to select all the frames in the timeline. And then I go down to where it says 0 seconds. And there's a little drop-up menu, and I'm going to change that right now to 0.1 seconds. And let's see when I play that back. So that seems a little bit more manageable. That one's a little bit more slow. So good, good, good. All right. So just to see what happens, I'm going to now play it at ½ a second, right? So maybe that's a little bit too slow. But there might be some animations, depending on what you are doing for this assignment, you might want your animations to play a little bit more slowly, particularly if there's more differentiation between the images. All right, so the other thing that I wanted to add, since what we have right now happening is that it goes from no erasers to, how many erasers do we have? 9, I think. So no erasers to 9 erasers, and then it just goes back to the beginning. What if I want it to sort of like breathe in and out? So go from no erasers to the 9 erasers, and then back to no erasers. In other words, playing forwards and then backwards. So that's pretty basic. All I do is I add a frame. So I duplicate a frame in my timeline, and then I turn off the visibility icon for my top layer. I duplicate layer, turn off the next layer, and I just keep doing that until I'm at that final background without any erasers. So you can now see I am playing forwards and backwards. It kind of holds up at the end. So I'm actually going to delete the last frame on my timeline because it's basically a duplicate of the first frame. So I select the frame and then I just click the little trash can icon. It brings up this message. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. So now when I play it back, it plays back fine, right? Also note that not all of your frames have to last the same amount of time on screen. You can change some to 0.1 seconds, some to no delay, some to 0.5 seconds, and so on. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and export. This is a GIF. So I'm going to go to File, Export, and Save Web, Save for Web, Legacy. And when I do that, I get a little pop-out window. And there we see the Save for Web window. I want to make sure that my format up here is set to GIF, right? So it might default to JPEG for some of you. Make sure that that's set for GIF. You'll also notice that we have from 2 to 256 possible colors for GIF, for the GIF format. And that's because any GIF image can have only up to 256 colors, right? And that's comparable to the millions of colors that you might get with a video file. So it only chooses the colors that are needed. Now you can decrease the colors from 256 to say 32 or maybe even 8 or 4. And you can see what happens in the over in the left portion of the Save for Web window where it says GIF and then it has a file size right below that. So you'll be able to see that the file size goes up or down. So down if you have fewer colors, up of course if you have more colors. I would also like you to take a look at the image size to the right of the Save for Web window, and it's important to keep the image size around 600 pixels at its widest point. If it's between 600 and 700, that's fine. So for example, my percentage is 23.72. If I want to make it an even 25%, that's going to make my pixel dimensions a little bit larger than 600, but it's 633, so that's fine. I want to avoid having really large GIFs. Sometimes they don't play well on various platforms, but I find that if you have a GIF that is either 600 to somewhere between 600 and 700 at its widest, in its widest proportion, either height or width, then you should be fine, assuming it's not a really long GIF. All right, so and you can also see that my file size is considerably smaller. I'm at about a 0.5 megabyte here, and then I just play that back to preview this. And I might switch, actually, let's see what happens when I turn it to 4 colors. So you can see some of this it does make the file size smaller, right? But it can also be a fun stylized look too. But I might go ahead and choose the full 256 colors, which does give me a little bit over 2 megabytes. Still not bad. And then I can go ahead and save that. And I'm going to save that in my my assignment 1 practice folder. Now if I double click on the GIF, it opens up in preview, right? So I'm not playing my GIF in preview as it is, but I can kind of look under the hood, as it were, and look at the individual frames. But if I want to play the GIF as one would see it online, I can just spacebar, just press the space bar, hover over the GIF and press the space bar to have that play on my desktop, or I can click and drag the GIF file into a browser like Firefox or Chrome or Safari, and it will open up in its own tab and play as it would play online. All right, and then that is it.